Imagine a valley where silence doesn't bring peace, but dread. The locals call it the Hollow, a sunken stretch of land shrouded in mist that clings to your skin like something alive. Here, the wind doesn't whistle. It moans, carrying with it a faint coppery tang, like the echo of old blood. Nestled at its center stands a ruin, the shell of a slaughterhouse, its brick walls blackened with age, its roof caved like a ribcage gnawed hollow. Even in daylight, it looks less like a building and more like a wound on the landscape. The villagers say animals refuse to graze near it, and children are forbidden to even look its way. But curiosity has a way of infecting hearts. For those who dare to step into the hollow, there's a suffocating weight in the air, as though unseen eyes are watching. The question that clings to the mist is simple yet horrifying. What was really butchered here? The hollow has never been silent. Even now, decades after the last cleaver fell, people swear they hear the sounds of labor at night. The wet slap of meat on stone, the sharp metallic ring of knives on bone, the guttural grunt of men at work. But when searchers arrive, the air is still, and the building empty. No one dares to stay long enough to see what stirs the noises. Travelers once told of strange lantern lights glowing inside the slaughterhouse at midnight, shapes moving across shattered windows. Some described a shadow that didn't match any man's form, too tall, too broad, dragging something behind it. The village elders simply shook their heads and said the hollow remembers. Because beneath those decaying floors, beneath the tools rusted in place, lie secrets not of animal flesh, but of something far more unspeakable. And those secrets, it seems, refuse to rest quietly. When the wind shifts, there are days when the hollow reeks. Not the smell of damp earth or decayed wood, but something sharper, like meat left too long in the sun, mingled with iron and rot. No flowers grow within 100 feet of the slaughterhouse. Even weeds wither in the soil, as if roots sense the corruption buried deep. Hunters have reported that their dogs panic, pulling at leashes, howling and foaming until dragged away. One farmer swore his cattle stampeded after grazing too near, their eyes wide in unspoken terror. The place is avoided at all costs, yet every so often, someone, an outsider, a thrill-seeker, decides to test the legend. Few last more than minutes inside the ruin before fleeing, trembling, pale. Those who linger longer sometimes claim to hear wet breathing in the dark, or see a cleaver glint where no hand holds it. But the most terrifying claim is of voices. Faint, pleading, begging not to be carved, and so the butcher's hollow stands, not just as a ruin, but as a scar. Locals still lower their voices when speaking of it, as if the very mention could awaken what sleeps there. They speak of the butcher's family in fragments. Hard men with cold eyes, women who never smiled, children who disappeared without explanation. All tied to the slaughterhouse, all tied to hunger. But hunger for what? That is the question that coils like a serpent through every telling. Some say the family simply went mad with bloodlust, blurring the line between livestock and neighbor. Others whisper darker. Rituals, sacrifices, a cult feeding on flesh to appease something that lived in the hollow long before the first stone was laid. Yet whether it was madness, ritual, or something else entirely, the truth still rots beneath the ground. And those who step too close to the hollow swear they feel it, waiting, watching, aching to be uncovered. The story begins in the mid-1800s, when a family of tradesmen migrated into the valley that would later earn the name the Hollow. The Enders family, though most records simply refer to them as the Butchers, purchased a strip of land where the soil was black and fertile, but they did not till fields or raise crops. Instead, they erected a squat brick structure whose purpose was clear from the start. It was not a barn or a mill, but a slaughterhouse. Locals whispered it was too large, too fortified, too out of place for such a small settlement. The iron hooks glinting from its beams seemed built for more than livestock. The family carried themselves with a quiet intensity. Their patriarch, Elias Enders, was described as a man of broad shoulders, eyes sunk deep, and a voice that carried like the echo of a well. He was a skilled butcher, yes, but more than that, he was obsessed. Records suggest he slaughtered not only for his own family but also for neighboring towns, quickly making the Enders name synonymous with fresh cuts, cheap prices, and meat that never seemed to spoil. Yet beneath that reputation grew unease. Farmers wondered how a single family could produce such volume, and why their smokehouse always burned, even at midnight. In time, the hollow was no longer just geography. It became a boundary. The hollow slaughterhouse thrived, even as surrounding farms faltered. While others suffered droughts, disease, or famine, Elias and his kin always had stock to butcher. Their cattle pens were rarely full, yet their wagons overflowed with cuts of beef, pork, and mutton. Traveling merchants asked no questions, happy to buy in bulk. But villagers noticed strange absences. Livestock stolen from nearby barns, hunters vanishing into the woods, a farmhand here, a beggar there. Each disappearance was explained away. Wolves, bandits, misfortune. Still, the unease grew. One account from 1863 describes a preacher who visited the Enders farm after rumors spread of meat unfit for Christian mouths. He returned pale, refusing to speak of what he saw, only muttering that their knives were sharper than any he'd known. Taxes were always paid on time, and shipments rolled steadily into markets. On paper, the family was a model of success. Yet the hollow took on a darker reputation. Children were warned never to play near the slaughterhouse. Women crossed themselves when the Enders wagon passed. And the family, though respected for their craft, were never invited to community gatherings. It was as though they belonged to the village in name only, set apart by the walls of brick, smoke, and silence. Over the decades, the Enders dynasty expanded. Sons became butchers, daughters became bookkeepers and smokehouse keepers, and every generation carried on the family business. By the late 1800s, the slaughterhouse had grown into a labyrinth of added rooms, cold cellars, and underground pits meant for preserving meat in the absence of ice. Travelers spoke of the building as a fortress of flesh, a place where knives sang and blood never dried. What was peculiar, however, was the secrecy. Few outsiders were ever allowed past the main hall, and workers rarely stayed long. Some complained of foul odors beyond animal stench, rot mingled with iron, as though blood seeped through the very stones. Others described hearing voices below, in the storage cellars, long after the day's work had ended. Yet none could prove wrongdoing, for the Enders family wielded not only cleavers, but influence. They employed men, supplied markets, and carried the unshakable aura of power. To challenge them meant risking livelihood, even safety. As the hollow grew infamous, so too did the whispers. That the Enders' name was cursed, that their prosperity was built not on cattle but on blood more precious. The family, however, endured, unbroken by gossip. Their knives stayed sharp, their tables laden, and their empire of flesh thrived in silence. By the turn of the 20th century, cracks began to appear in the Enders' legacy. Industrial slaughterhouses emerged in nearby cities, drawing trade away. Railways brought competition, and the once dominant hollow operation faltered. Yet what unnerved villagers was not their decline, but their persistence. Despite dwindling markets, the slaughterhouse fires never ceased. Smoke rose nightly, thicker, darker, as though the family worked harder than ever. But livestock in the pens grew fewer each year. Where then, people asked, did the endless meat come from? In 1907, a county inspector arrived after repeated complaints. His report, though fragmentary, described cellars deep and unwholesome, tools rust black with use, and odors most foul. Weeks later, the inspector disappeared on a return journey, his body never found. By 1912, the Ender's name vanished from census rolls. The family either fled or were swallowed by the hollow itself. Left behind was only the ruin. Walls streaked with something darker than weather, hooks that swayed though no wind stirred, and a legend that would outlive them all. For the people who remained, one truth gnawed at every whispered story. The Enders were butchers, yes, but perhaps their sharpest trade was not with beasts of the field, but with flesh of their own kind. The first rumors began quietly, as whispers traded at the village well. In the 1860s, when the Enders family was at the height of its trade, people began to vanish. A hired hand sent to deliver firewood never returned. A pair of hunters, both brothers, set out for deer in the hollow but were found neither alive nor dead. Months later, a drifter seeking work was seen entering the slaughterhouse grounds. Yet no one witnessed his exit. Each disappearance was explained in mundane terms: wolves, bandits, or the dangers of travel. But the pattern gnawed at the villagers. Too many had last been seen walking near the slaughterhouse. Too many had vanished without trace, as though the hollow itself swallowed them whole. Over time, mothers began to warn children not only to avoid the Enders, but to never answer if the butchers called their names. Strange, too, were the wagons leaving the slaughterhouse at night, not toward markets, but toward the woods. What cargo could they carry when no cattle remained? The road itself seemed cursed. Travelers who ventured too close sometimes claimed to hear cries in the distance. Desperate, muffled, and cut short, as though choked beneath iron. It was not just the missing that fed suspicion, but the sounds. Farmers working their fields at dusk spoke of noises rolling from the hollow unlike any animal known to them. At first, the villagers described the clang of metal, the hiss of steam, the crash of wood splitting, ordinary echoes of slaughterhouse labor. But then came the cries. Sharp, high-pitched wails that broke into silence too suddenly. Some swore they heard voices, pleas for mercy muffled by stone walls. At night, the wind carried the sound of chanting, a low rumble like prayer, punctuated by the dull thud of cleavers on bone. One night, a shepherd reported hearing a chorus of voices in harmony, rising from beneath the ground itself, as if the earth beneath the slaughterhouse were hollow and filled with people. No investigation proved the claims, yet unease thickened. Rumors spread that the Enders were building more than cellars. They were carving out catacombs, rooms unseen, where neither light nor law could reach. And within those hidden chambers, people whispered, the true butchery began. By the 1870s, the hollow had grown infamous far beyond the valley. Peddlers passing through carried stories into neighboring towns, tales of a feast that no guest survived. According to one persistent rumor, the Enders hosted private banquets for select travelers and wealthy clients. The meals were said to be lavish, roasted cuts unlike any known, tender meat that melted on the tongue. Yet those invited rarely returned. Some were merchants on long routes who vanished without trace. Others were outsiders too far from home for anyone to search. The legend spread that the Enders fed their guests not only with meat but upon it, that every dish placed on the table bore the secret of another soul already devoured. One chilling account describes a tinker who staggered back to town after 3 days, raving that he had dined with the Enders. His eyes were wild, his lips cracked, and his words barely coherent. He spoke of candles burning low, of laughter around a table, and of realizing too late that the flesh on his plate was no animal's. He vanished the following night. Whether madness or truth, the story rooted itself deep, staining the hollow with fear. As the rumors deepened, darker whispers took hold, that the Enders were not merely butchers, but cultists. Villagers recalled seeing markings painted in ash upon the slaughterhouse doors, symbols that resembled knives crossed over circles, as though warding or summoning something unseen. At certain times of year, the equinox, the harvest moon, the hollow was said to glow with firelight, the sky filled with black smoke that smelled not of livestock but of burning hair. Some swore the Enders worshipped a spirit of hunger, an ancient presence tied to the valley long before settlers came. To feed it, they offered not cattle but kin, spilling blood in rituals disguised as slaughter. And always, the evidence was missing. No bones, no bodies, only the unease of those who claimed to hear drumming deep beneath the earth. Whether the stories were superstition or veiled truth, one fact remained. By the turn of the century, no villager would set foot in the hollow after dark. For it was said that hunger itself walked there, a hunger that knew no end, a hunger sharpened by knives that never dulled. The slaughterhouse stood for decades without challenge, its brick walls weathering storms and its chimneys belching smoke without pause. But time has a way of tearing secrets into the open. In the autumn of 1891, after days of heavy rain, part of the slaughterhouse floor gave way. A butcher's apprentice, one of the few hired from outside the Enders family, plunged through rotted timbers into darkness. Villagers rushed to his cries and dragged him out, half-conscious, his body broken from the fall. What chilled them was not his injuries, but what his fall revealed. Beneath the floor lay a hollow chamber, a place no one had known existed. Lanterns lowered into the gap revealed walls streaked black with old stains and hooks driven into the stone itself. At first, villagers believed it to be an abandoned storage cellar. But then came the stench, thick, cloying, unmistakable. When men ventured down, they found bones scattered across the floor. Some belonged to animals, yes, but others were too long, too human. Skulls lay cracked and gnawed, as though something had feasted. The discovery spread quickly, yet the Enders offered no explanation. They sealed the hole within days, forbidding workers to speak. But the whispers could not be buried as easily as the bones. In 1892, county officials dispatched an inspector, Arthur Wilcox, to examine the hollow after petitions from terrified villagers. His journal, fragments of which survive, describes a place reeking of decay. He wrote of stairs descending into depths unfit for men, and of walls so thick with soot and blood that no washing could cleanse them. In one cellar, he noted racks of preserved meat, yet could not identify the source. His entries grew stranger as the days passed. He described voices in the dark, faint sobs that seemed to echo from behind bricked-up walls. He wrote of tools unlike any used on livestock, blades serrated for tearing flesh, chains bolted low to the ground, restraints clearly built for something upright. Most chilling was his final entry. "These are not cattle bones. I am certain of it now. God forgive me. I must return tomorrow with lantern and courage enough to dig." He never did. Wilcox vanished before filing his report, leaving behind only his journal, smuggled by a clerk who dared copy its pages. The Enders claimed he departed for the city, but no train records bore his name. His fate became yet another layer of silence covering the hollow's depths. The true horror came years later, when workers attempting to demolish part of the slaughterhouse unearthed pits beneath the foundation. What began as shallow digging soon revealed chambers filled with refuse, charred bones, heaps of ash, and fragments of clothing recognizable not as animal hide but human garb. Witnesses spoke of buttons, belt buckles, and even the curved rim of a child's shoe pulled from the muck. The pits were lined with stone, as though deliberately built to contain the dead. When the stench overwhelmed the men, work ceased, and word spread. The site was abandoned once more, yet some dared return under cover of night to see for themselves. Those who descended spoke of carvings etched into the walls, crude symbols of knives and circles, repeating endlessly as though part of some ritual language. Some swore the symbols glowed faintly in lantern light, as if drawn in something other than paint. The discoveries were hushed by officials, buried under silence, but the villagers needed no confirmation. The hollow was no mere slaughterhouse. It was a graveyard, carved and fed by human hands. By the early 1900s, when outsiders tried once more to investigate, much of the evidence had vanished. Records claimed the Ender's family sealed chambers, destroyed tools, and burned refuse in great bonfires that stained the sky for weeks. Yet even after, the smell lingered. When workers returned to survey the ruins, they found not emptiness, but fresh traces. A cleaver sharpened to gleaming edge, chains polished as though still in use, and bones scattered as if newly gnawed. Who tended these remnants when the family was said to have fled? No one could say. Locals whispered that not all the Enders were gone, that some remained hidden in the catacombs, sustained by their ancient hunger. Others claimed the hollow itself consumed the evidence, swallowing it into the earth. Whatever the truth, one fact was clear. Every attempt to uncover the slaughterhouse's secrets ended in disappearance, madness, or silence. And so the hollow remained sealed, its horrors buried not just beneath stone and soil, but beneath fear itself. Yet the ground never truly forgets. And when the wind blows just right, the valley still breathes the stench of what was once hidden, but never gone. What investigators never proved outright, the villagers whispered with certainty. The Enders family were not simply tradesmen, but worshippers of something older than themselves. They called it the cult of hunger. To the outside world, they were butchers. To those who lived in their shadow, they were priests of a god that demanded flesh. Their slaughterhouse was its temple, the cleaver its sacred instrument, and the blood its offering. Oral tales preserved by elders describe nights when the slaughterhouse bell rang not at dawn but at midnight. The sound echoed like a funeral toll across the valley, summoning initiates to gather below. There, deep in hidden chambers, the Enders performed rites said to appease the spirit of the hollow, a force they believed had granted them prosperity in exchange for ceaseless sacrifice. The rituals blended butchery and devotion. Prayers muttered over flayed bodies, entrails arranged in symbols across the floor, and feasts where kin consumed kin beneath candlelight. The hunger they served was insatiable, not bound to season or famine. For every cut of meat served in daylight markets, another was consumed in the secrecy of ritual, a cycle that grew darker with each passing generation. Though much evidence was burned, fragments survived in memory and rumor. The tools of the Enders were not ordinary butchers' implements but instruments shaped for torment. Hooks were driven low into stone walls, designed not for carcasses but for limbs that struggled. Cleavers bore symbols etched into their handles, circles within circles, blades marked with lines that resembled teeth. Chains bolted to floors were found polished smooth, as though the flesh that strained against them had rubbed away rust. There were stories of iron masks, hollow-eyed and jawless, forced upon victims to silence their screams. Witnesses swore they saw racks of bones displayed like trophies, arranged in symmetry around altars of blood. These were not the tools of trade, but of worship. Even meals, villagers claimed, became ritualistic. Servants carried platters of roasted flesh to tables where family and chosen guests feasted in silence, as though dining was itself a prayer. Each bite was said to seal their covenant with the spirit of the hollow, binding them to its endless appetite. To refuse the meal was to risk becoming the next course. Among the darkest legends are those of the hollow feasts, banquets whispered of but never confirmed, where the Enders invited outsiders to dine. Guests sat at long tables beneath low arches, lanterns swaying in stale air. At first, the courses seemed ordinary: rich stews, roasted meats, smoked cuts. But slowly unease crept in. The meat tasted strange, too tender, flavored with something more than spice. And the eyes of the Enders never left their guests, watching, smiling faintly, as though awaiting recognition. When realization struck that the meal was human, panic came too late. Some guests fled, but most never left the hollow. Their absence became the stuff of rumor, told by those who claimed to hear faint laughter echoing across the valley on feast nights. One tale speaks of a merchant who returned, gaunt and trembling, his mind shattered. He swore he had eaten the flesh of his own companion, served to him on a silver plate. He did not live long after, found hanging in his stable, lips gnawed as if he had tried to chew away the memory. Whether true or not, the hollow feasts became the ultimate horror, proof to villagers that the Enders did not merely kill, they consumed. The deepest whispers speak of blood not as sustenance, but as sacrament. The Enders believed that in every drop spilled, they drew closer to the spirit they served. Witnesses described altars slick with red, where chants rose until drowned by screams. Victims were not killed outright, but bled slowly, their suffering prolonged to honor the appetite of the hollow. Family records, fragmentary, burned, but partially recovered, mention covenants sealed in crimson, and the renewal of strength through the marrow of man. Some historians argue this was metaphor, but locals insist it was literal. They say the Enders drank blood from goblets carved of bone, anointing their children with it at birth, marking them as heirs to the hunger. To them, flesh was currency, blood was scripture, and death was devotion. When their empire of slaughter began to crumble, the rituals only intensified, as though desperation drove them deeper into madness. And though their house fell silent, the question endures. Was it madness, or was it worship? Did the Enders invent their god of hunger, or did they merely serve what had always dwelt in the hollow, waiting for men cruel enough to heed its call? By 1912, the Enders family name disappeared from census rolls, their estate abandoned as though they had simply dissolved into mist. No bodies were recovered, no graves discovered, no records of travel found. One day smoke rose from the chimneys, and the next the slaughterhouse stood silent, its doors yawning open to darkness. Villagers ventured near only at daylight, and even then with trembling caution. Inside, they found signs of a meal left unfinished. Plates overturned, blood drying on the floor, a fire still smoldering in the hearth. But of the family themselves, nothing remained. Some claimed they fled prosecution, escaping to distant lands. Others believed they had turned on one another, devouring themselves in a final act of worship. A few whispered the most dreadful possibility, that the hollow itself claimed them, swallowing them into its depths where no one could follow. Whatever the truth, their sudden absence only deepened the legend. The slaughterhouse stood empty, but never lifeless, for those who dared linger swore they felt breath upon their necks, as though unseen mouths still hungered in the shadows. Fearing what might be found, or worse, what might remain, the county ordered the slaughterhouse sealed. Doors were barred with iron, windows bricked over, and the main hall collapsed in upon itself. Yet no matter how tightly it was shut, the hollow resisted burial. Strange fires continued to flare at night, flickering deep within the ruins though no one lit them. Locals swore they saw figures pacing behind the boarded windows, shadows too broad and twisted to belong to men. Travelers spoke of being lured by distant lanterns only to find themselves lost amid the valley fog, hearing laughter just beyond sight. Attempts to demolish the site met disaster. Workers sickened, tools broke, accidents left men crushed beneath falling stone. After 3 failed efforts, the county abandoned the task. Instead, the slaughterhouse was left to rot, standing as a scar upon the land. Children were told to never speak the Ender's name, for to do so was to invite their hunger. But silence did not stop the stories. The hollow became a place of pilgrimage for the curious, and a place of terror for those who remembered. In the decades that followed, stories of hauntings multiplied. Hunters spoke of hearing cleavers ring out across the valley at night, though no living butcher remained. Hikers stumbled upon pools of fresh blood seeping from the earth, vanishing by morning without trace. Some claimed to see figures moving through the ruins, men in bloodied aprons, faces obscured, dragging chains that scraped against stone. Others described voices calling to them, pleading for release, only to twist into mocking laughter. The most chilling accounts came from those who dared enter the cellars. They reported the air turning suffocating, the temperature plunging, and whispers rising from beneath the floor, a chorus of countless voices begging in unison. Some swore they glimpsed pale faces staring from cracks in the walls, eyes hollow, mouths open in eternal screams. Few remained inside long enough to prove their tales, and those who did often left broken, unable to sleep without hearing knives whetted in the dark. Whether hallucination or haunting, the hollow seemed alive, replaying its horrors for any who trespassed upon its memory. Today, the slaughterhouse is no more than a ruin, its bricks crumbling, its beams sagging like broken bones. Yet the legend of the butcher's hollow endures, stitched into the folklore of the valley. Some claim it is cursed ground, where nothing grows and no animal treads. Others insist the curse is not of place, but of blood, that descendants of the Enders still walk among us, bound by an ancient covenant of hunger. Paranormal investigators who visit report equipment failing, batteries drained, and recordings filled with static punctuated by faint, inhuman sounds. More than one has fled in terror, refusing to return. Locals say the hollow cannot be cleansed, for the appetite born there is eternal. They warn that to speak its name is to feed it, to give it strength enough to stir again. And so the valley remains scarred, a place avoided, a story whispered only in the safety of firelight. For the lesson of the Enders is not simply of cruelty, but of hunger unchecked, an appetite so consuming it devours not just flesh, but family, faith, and future. And somewhere, in the ruined silence, the hollow waits. The butcher's hollow lingers in that uneasy place where history dissolves into myth. Some argue the Enders family was nothing more than butchers whose grim trade bred superstition. They claim the missing persons were coincidence, the bones those of livestock, the chants no more than the echo of cleavers in stone halls. Yet others point to fragments of record, an inspector vanished, pits unearthed with human relics, villagers who swore their eyes had seen more than animals slain. Truth and legend blur until they are inseparable, each feeding the other like flesh to a fire. What cannot be denied is the endurance of fear. A century has passed, and still the hollow is spoken of in whispers, as though naming it too loudly might stir what slumbers there. Whether fact or fiction, the tale has a gravity that draws the curious and repels the wise. For in every retelling, the question resurfaces. How much of the story must be true for the horror to be real? At its heart, the tale of the butchers is a parable of appetite, an appetite that began with survival but metastasized into obsession. If the stories hold truth, the Enders fed upon their neighbors, upon travelers, upon anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. But even if one dismisses cannibal feasts as invention, the symbolism remains powerful. Hunger is more than physical. It is the need for power, for dominance, for excess beyond reason. The Enders embodied this hunger, sharpening it with each generation until it consumed not only their victims but themselves. In this way, the hollow becomes more than a ruin, it becomes a mirror. It reflects the danger of unchecked appetite, of families and societies that carve and carve until nothing remains. And whether or not the spirit of hunger they served was real, the consequences of worshipping it were carved deep into the valley's history, leaving scars no time can heal. Though the slaughterhouse crumbles, the hollow has never grown silent. Paranormal researchers, thrill seekers, and the occasional fool still descend into its depths. They bring back tales that mirror those of a century past. Voices in the dark, the clang of unseen cleavers, the smell of rot rising from the ground. Technology offers no shield. Cameras distort, recorders hiss with static, compasses spin aimlessly. Some investigators vanish altogether, their fates echoing those of the villagers long ago. The hollow seems to feed on attention, its legend growing stronger each time it is spoken aloud. Locals know this, which is why they turn away outsiders who ask too many questions. To them, the hollow is not entertainment but a living scar, best left untouched. Yet still, curiosity drives people forward. And perhaps that is the true curse, that no matter how much blood has been spilled, men will always return, drawn by hunger for answers, only to find themselves part of the feast in the end. The Butcher's Hollow is not merely a story about one family or one place. It is a story about us. Our fear of hunger, our fascination with the grotesque, our unspoken knowledge that beneath civilization lies a cleaver waiting to fall. Perhaps the Enders were madmen. Perhaps they were cultists. Perhaps they were simply butchers whose legend grew fangs over time. But the Hollow's power lies in its uncertainty. It asks a question we cannot answer, one that gnaws at the imagination. If faced with starvation, with desperation, with the darkness of human need, how far would we go? Would we turn away, or would we sharpen the knife? The Hollow whispers that the line between man and butcher is thinner than we wish to believe, and that appetite, whether for flesh, for power, or for survival, can devour us all. And so the legend endures, not because it is distant, but because it might be closer than we dare to admit. The Butcher's Hollow is more than ruin, more than legend. It is a wound in the earth that never healed, a reminder that hunger, whether born of desperation or devotion, can strip away humanity itself. The Enders family may be gone, their slaughterhouse crumbling into dust, but the echoes remain. The clang of unseen cleavers, the whispers in the fog, the stench that rises when the wind shifts. And so the Hollow waits, silent but never empty, its appetite eternal. Step too close, speak its name too loudly, and perhaps you will learn what the villagers always feared, that the knives of the Hollow are never truly at rest, only waiting for fresh flesh to carve.